Yeah. Okay, I think we're here, Helen. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're all listening, and I hope you're enjoying your lunch and are looking forward to the weekend. It's just a few hours away. If you haven't met me before, my name's Bekah Legg, and I'm really proud to be the quite new director still of Restored, which is a Christian charity working to end violence against women by equipping the church to recognise and respond to domestic abuse. Now, if you stumbled across us this afternoon, almost by accident, do visit our website later to find out more about who we are and what we do. You can find us at restored-uk.org. At Restored, we love working with friends, individuals and other organisations, all working together to end violence against women and to help the church to change the story for women all around the world. Now, one of those friends is Helen Paynter, and I'm really delighted to introduce you to her now. Helen's had an eclectic career. She's been a medical doctor, a church minister, and is now the coordinator of theological education and the director of the Centre of the Study of Bible and Violence at Bristol Baptist College, as well as the author of a number of books, the latest of which we're going to talk about this afternoon. But we'll come to that in just a moment. Helen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely to be with you.
It's a pleasure. We nearly didn't make it. We had quite some technical difficulties.
We shaved in at the last. I shaved in at the last minute, didn't I? It was fighting with the computer.
We were nearly all going to have to lip read Helen, but fortunately that didn't pass. So we got that. Helen, you've got quite an incredible career path. I can't imagine how long you've spent studying. But what's brought you on that kind of medical doctor, minister at a church, to where you are now, writing the books that you're writing? How's that journey kind of unfolded in your life?
Oh wow, I'll try and make that brief. So I had a kind of niggling sense that I was called to ministry, even while I was a doctor, and for quite a long time. But when my youngest daughter was 2. Had four perhaps, I suppose, later part of the journey, had a really strong sense of call to ministry, and so left my medical career to obey that, and came here to the college to train for ministry. Discovered that I really enjoyed the study side of it as well. So when I finished and went off and was ordained to serve in a local church, I also continued at the college doing a PhD. And I did that on humour in the Book of Kings. So obviously,
in the Book of Kings.
Oh, there's loads of it. But I've been grappling with the question of how to interpret biblical violence for a long while, probably since before I started at college here. My attention was drawn to it by our church youth worker, actually, who was grappling with it with a young person. So I've been interested in how we interpret biblical violence for a long time, and have done some writing on it and some thinking about it. But as I got deeper into that, I started discovering so many different ways in which the Bible is what I call weaponized. Sometimes that is the texts of violence in the Bible that are being used, sort of misapplied. Sometimes it's totally unexpected passages where somebody is twisting them from their purpose and using them to justify violence or to harm somebody else. So I've got those kind of twin interests now, and yes, every month that goes by, I think I kind of find new terrible applications of scripture in that way.
Oh, that's, and actually I can understand that passion, having worked in a church myself, having studied myself, wanting to help, and being a teacher. I used to be a teacher, history teacher. So I love helping people to understand and to be able to use text well and to be able to really understand who God is apart from anything else. But before we carry on kind of digging into some of that, let's have some simple questions, some quick fire questions to help us know the Helen beneath this, frankly, woman that you appear to be.
No, not at all. Not at all.
All the different things that you can do. So some easy questions to help us get to know you. What's your favourite season?
My favourite season is probably summer. I actually enjoy the changing seasons. I wouldn't like to live somewhere that didn't have them, but I think probably of all of them, summer.
Yeah. And this was a cracker, wasn't it?
It was, wasn't it?
Weather-wise.
Yes.
Balance it up. Okay, so here you go. Big test. Chocolate or crisps?
Chocolate, I think. But actually, I think the best thing, and I kind of do this at Christmas, is you have a bit of sweet and then you want a bit of savoury just to kind of balance it up, and then you're ready for a bit sweet again. So, can I have both?
That's true. When I was a child, I had jam and crisp sandwiches. That was very, not anymore. Okay, so what's your favourite type of holiday? What would you do given the chance to do anything?
Probably go somewhere where there are mountains and walk.
Good choice.
I just love mountains.
Yeah, I do. They're beautiful. And if COVID had never happened, if it didn't exist, what would a great day off look like for you?
Well, I think it would have to involve brunch, time with my family, probably a nice walk, maybe some time in a coffee shop, and then, I don't know, can I have brunch and a meal out in the evening? I don't know, but maybe.
So, yeah.
Something like that, I think.
I think so. Great. If it's going to be a great day off, it's allowed to involve lots of food. Brilliant. And who would you most like to meet? They don't have to still be alive. Who would you most like to meet?
Oh, do you know, I don't know. I would quite like to meet Barack Obama, actually. Ooh. And maybe Michelle as well. Maybe I could have dinner with the two of them, please.
Yeah, I think that's allowed. I think if they're a couple, you're allowed to.
Thank you.
But perhaps only if you can take me along. I can join you. That would be
fair enough.
That'd be good. So, but really, Helen, the reason we've got you here is to talk about your new book, which is called The Bible Doesn't Tell Me So. Now, I have been very privileged because it's not out. When is it coming out? In the next couple of weeks?
23rd, yeah, 23rd of this month.
But I have actually read it because I got a sneak preview version of it. And I really, really loved it because, Helen, what I appreciated was the depth of theology in it. So it's a really, for want of a better phrase, it's a really clever book. It's like proper study, proper understanding of the Bible, but it's written in a way that I think is really, really accessible. So you don't need to be a theologian to read it. You don't need to be a church leader. I think it's really accessible to anybody. But if I try and describe what it's all about, I might not do it justice. So could you help us with a little summary of what it's all about?
Yeah, so it's addressed to women. Now, I just want to stop there, actually, because I'm aware that domestic abuse doesn't just happen husband against wife, but because it's looking at the way that the Bible is used to justify or to keep people in situations of domestic violence, it seemed to me that from my research that this was mostly happening when a husband was abusing a wife. And so it's addressed to women, although it could be relevant to men as well. But it's addressed to women who are caught in situations of domestic abuse, and to those who want to help them, of course, and their pastors and their friends and their churches as well. But to saying, I guess, what the title tries to imply, there's probably a whole complex of things that are making it very difficult for you to find safety, perhaps, if you're still in this situation. But the Bible doesn't need to be one of them. The Bible is on your side, it's not on your abuser's side. So that's, in a nutshell, what I'm trying to do there.
So looking at so many of these different scriptures, isn't it, and understanding what they really, really mean. And I really loved it. So what prompted you to write this book in particular?
It was an email. It's interesting how I was thinking about this the other day, how several of the things big projects I've done have been triggered by somebody contacting me with a question. And I'd been part of a podcast series called #SheToo, which was about texts of sexual violence in the Old Testament, and I'd been part of that. And because someone had heard me speaking about that, this lady emailed me. I'd never heard of her, never met her before, and she emailed. She'd just got out of an abusive relationship, and she'd been married to her abuser for decades. She had grown-up children. And she emailed with this string of questions, kind of along the lines of, why does the Bible tell me I've got to put up with this? I mean, it was a series of questions, but essentially it was that. And it's very hard to answer that sort of question over email in the sort of constraints of, but I did my best, and I kind of addressed each of her questions with like a longish paragraph. And I thought she would either just never reply, or she'd email and say, well, that didn't help. Yeah, thanks, but no thanks, sort of thing. But she emailed back almost straight away and said, oh, I wish I'd seen this before. And that just broke my heart, actually. And I thought, and so that was what triggered me writing. So I wrote this book with her in my mind, with her 20 years ago in my mind, thinking, if you had, I want to write the book that will show you that you don't have to put up with this.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I mean, I can hear your voice actually. Like that's an emotive thing, isn't it? That,
yeah.
Gosh, to know that somebody, if they'd have read that all those years before, maybe their life would have turned out so differently. Maybe their story would have been really different. I know that's so much at the heart of who we are, and we want to help people realize that maybe the world isn't quite what they thought, and God isn't quite who they thought. But you've clearly got all the credentials for the theological side of that. But I know then that you went on a bit of a journey of researching the lives of survivors and understanding. And what did you discover in that process?
I discovered that domestic abuse is as common within the church as it is in wider society, which is just shocking and heartbreaking. And I discovered a whole load of ways in which the Bible is being weaponized. And what I found was, I could have listed half a dozen texts that might seem to serve the abuser's purpose. They don't, but on the surface might seem to. And I was expecting to encounter those when I talked. So I spent a lot of time talking with people who had, I don't think anyone was still in the situation, but people who had left, had left partners. But what I discovered was a whole load of other texts that I would never have guessed could have been used in that way, and yet were being, and they were being so twisted from their meaning. So yeah, I basically spent my time compiling a list really of the texts that were being used. And I also discovered something which disturbed me, and I want to be careful how I express this, because as a Christian, as a woman minister, it'll be obvious to listeners that I am somebody who believes in women having leadership roles in church, but not all churches do. And while I disagree theologically about that, I don't want to fall out with anybody on that matter. And so I've tried within this book to speak really, really respectfully to and about that theology. But one of the things that I did discover was that in some churches, they are, and I heard this language from more than one person, they operate to groom women to accept abuse. And I don't think for a moment anyone's trying to do this. But there is something about the perhaps patriarchy within a church, and perhaps the language that is used, and a whole system of things that are happening that effectively groom women that this has to be endured, and that really shocked me.
Yeah, actually, do you know what? It was one of the things that struck me about the book was how well I think you did try and hold that balance and that line, so that actually your book's totally readable by anybody, but it doesn't matter if you're a complementarian or an egalitarian, because I don't think you are offensive to anybody, and you're so generous and gracious in how you talk about that, and so gentle and cautious, that I think it's if anyone's listening and going, oh, I'd just say read it, because it is, it speaks to you wherever you are, and acknowledges that actually whatever your position on women in leadership, actually none of us sit there and go, oh no, but abuse women is fine. And I think you're like that. How you phrase that is really helpful, because it helps everybody access it, which is brilliant. But within all of that, you've done all of that research. The same kind of research we've done at Restored, and discovered that actually domestic abuse is as prevalent within the church as it is outside of it. And but actually, then, as you're looking at the Bible, what would you say? What's God's heart for the abused? What's God's heart for the oppressed? What's the overarching theme of the Bible, I guess, when it comes to that?
Oh, the overarching, it begins in Genesis 1 when God speaks to a man and a woman, and says they are in my image. And so right from the very beginning, we discover the value of every person, male or female, and that there is no hierarchy and no inbuilt power structure or dominion in the way that God purposed it. And that heart for women, for everybody, but for women is woven through both testaments, actually. And you look at the way that Jesus dignified the women in the way he dealt with them. So this is a huge theme, but also God's heart for the abused, for the oppressed, for the downtrodden. Jesus only gets angry 2 or 3 times in his life, and the times it's happening are the times when he's seeing people being abused, people being manipulated by others who are exercising power over them. And he talks about that language of, anyone who puts a stumbling block in the way of one of these little ones, it'd better if a millstone was around their neck and they're thrown into the sea. This is strong language. So as we see God's heart for those who are downtrodden and oppressed, and God's anger at those who abuse them.
Yeah. And the injustice of it all as well, isn't it? I was reading a passage in Amos 5. We've got another friend of Restored, who's been supporting a survivor through the court system. That's been really traumatic and difficult and terribly unjust. And actually you realise that God was talking about this 3,000 years ago, through his prophets to people, and his heart is for justice and for righteousness, and for his people to lift up and carry, and bring restoration to people who've been oppressed and abused. I'm with you. But I know that one of those things that gets, and I think, misunderstood and probably and then misinterpreted and then misused and then weaponized almost, is actually the concept of forgiveness, which sits right at the heart, isn't it, of Christianity. It's you can't get very far in the Christian faith without grappling with forgiveness. But then I don't think people always get to the end of what forgiveness really looks like and what it means, and what it critically, I suppose, doesn't mean. So how do you understand or explain forgiveness in the context of abuse? Because I think that, just from the conversations we have with the survivors in our network, we know that actually it's so often this kind of demand that the Bible tells us we must forgive, which is true, but that it becomes this stumbling block actually of, you're not listening, you're not hearing me, you're putting, how do you understand forgiveness in that context?
So I think, putting it negatively first, I think we mustn't assume that forgiveness always means that a relationship is restored to what it used to be. And that, when we're talking about really serious, grave offences with ongoing consequences, and forgiveness or not, there are ongoing consequences that these trauma victims suffer. That it doesn't mean that abuser has to be permitted back into the home, back into share the finances, back into the bed. It doesn't mean that. If we look at, there's a chapter in, I think it's Matthew's Gospel, where Jesus addresses the question of what do I do if it's expressed as, what do I do if my brother sins against me? And he addresses that question twice in just within a few verses. And the first time, he talks about forgiving and forgiving and forgiving and forgiving and forgiving. And it talks about 70 times 7. And he's referring back then to this moment in Genesis 4, I think it is, when Lamech, who was one of the, he's very, very early, he's Adam's great-grandson or something. And he celebrates the fact that he's going to exercise vengeance 77-fold. And so when Jesus says this, forgive 77 times, he's saying, you don't take vengeance. So that's the first thing about forgiveness, is it's a choosing not to take vengeance, which is of course not the same as refusing to participate in a legal process, because that's about civil law and so on. But the second time in that chapter, he's talking about in church discipline terms, but he talks about, if someone sins against you, go and show them your fault, just the two of you. Well, most women who are experiencing abuse will have done that many, many times, actually. Then you bring along a few witnesses. And then if they still won't listen, you put them out of the church. So what he's saying is, there is a time when somebody needs to be, when the perpetrator needs to be separated from the person that they are harming. And that is not contradicting the need to forgive. And it's not contradicting the need to set aside vengeance, but that it doesn't mean you have to live together again. Yeah.
Which is really important. And I don't think I've heard that explained quite like that, but I've read it in your book. I've heard it explained like that before. And I think that's an incredibly helpful, because forgiveness isn't the same as letting somebody keep on hurting you, is it? It's not the same as putting yourself in harm's way again. It's something entirely different, but really, really helpful. One of the other things that I was really moved about was, there's a chapter in your book talking about Jesus and his experience of abuse. And, you started by quoting some of the Christmas carols that, say God incarnate and, God come down as man, which is this, again, sits at the centre of our faith. But But what is it about God coming down to earth in human form that is such an encouragement to those experiencing abuse?
It means he's not a God who's just watching from heaven saying, oh dear, I don't like to see that. And he is, but he's so much more than that, because he's a God who has shared our experience. And actually, if you tease out Jesus' experiences, particularly towards in the last hours of his life, he shares so much with what many domestic abusers, victims of domestic abuse experience. Actually, earlier on, we see him being willfully misunderstood. People actually, frankly, trying to gaslight him. Yeah. And so we see him being talked about and misrepresented and lied about and all those horrible things that go on. And then, as I say, in the passion narratives, towards the end of his life, we see him being physically abused really badly. Okay. We see him being stripped naked and shamed. Some people these days talk about Jesus being sexually abused, and I don't think we can be confident about that. But we do know that he was stripped naked, and actually the Gospels lay that on quite thick if you count the number of times it's described, and just hung out just hung out to dry like that. It's awful, and so he really understands what someone who is experiencing domestic abuse is going through, because he has been there. There's more to say about the power of the cross for forgiveness and for ultimately healing the world, but in terms of the power of the incarnation, I just don't think we can overstate it. It's so important.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is real for survivors is feeling all alone and feeling like nobody understands and feeling like nobody gets it. And actually to have that realization that Jesus really does, is extraordinary, and quite powerful, all in and of itself. Mm. One of the things I do like about your book is that towards the end, I said that like there's lots of things I don't, I basically like but one of the things I really liked was that towards the end you have these 3 chapters, and there's a very short one for those who've experienced abuse, because really all of the rest are aimed at them, and then one for church leaders, and then a chapter for perpetrators. And I liked that you spoke to them. Because it can be very easy to demonize perpetrators and abusers, and the truth is what they do is dreadful, and it is, and you never want to minimize that. But I just wondered if you could kind of sum up what your message was for perpetrators. What is it that you want perpetrators to hear in the midst of it?
In your better moments, you probably don't want to do this. There are probably moments when you regret the way that you are hurting the person you're hurting. And what I said in my book was, if this is one of those moments, then you need to act on it right now, because we know that good news resolutions don't last. We know that that how we feel today won't necessarily influence how we feel tomorrow. So if that is you, and this is that moment, then take steps right now to make sure it never happens again. And that may well mean turning yourself into a police station. It might mean moving out of the home. It will mean losing the rights to control what happens in your marriage or your relationship. And it may well mean cooperating with legal authorities. But if you do not do that, you will continue to abuse, you'll continue to harm someone that you say you love, and you'll continue to damage your own soul. So for the sake of the person that you say you love, and for the sake of your own soul, stop right now, repent, get the help you need, cooperate fully with everyone who's going to be stepping in, and make sure that this never, ever happens again. Because there is forgiveness, because in Jesus Christ, there is forgiveness even for people like you and me.
And that's really powerful. And that, I don't think it could be said more succinctly or more clearly. It is, I think it's that being able to prepare to relinquish control is absolutely critical, isn't it? So Helen, in a minute, I'm going to open up and let other people, I know some more questions are coming in, but if there's a survivor listening in now, so a survivor now, is there one message that you'd want them to hear above everything else? What would that be? What would you like to say to them?
I'd like to say that God loves you so very much, and you are so very precious, and it is never his intention that you should be harmed like this. And if there's any way you can make yourself safe, do it wisely, do it carefully, don't rush into things, don't put yourself in danger, but know that you do not have to put up with this. Know that God is on your side and not on the side of someone who hurts you, and may God bless you.
Oh, Helen, thank you so much. One last little question from me, actually, before we take questions. If somebody has listened to this and thinks, golly, I'd like to read Helen's book, I know it's not out to the 23rd, but then how can somebody get their hands on it when it is out?
So it's actually available for pre-order straight away. You can get it from any good bookshops, including quite a well-known online one, but there are other bookshops exist. You can also get it directly from the publisher. And I think it's going to be out in Kindle in due course. I'm not sure it's available on Kindle yet, though.
No, I've seen that the button's there on the
good.
You may find Kindle to be done, but that's great, thank you. And I'd like to say that Restored is running a fantastic opportunity to get your hands on Helen's book as soon as it's out, because we would like to send a copy free of charge to anybody who is prepared to sign up and give a regular donation to Restored today. You see, over the last few months, we've been very busy putting some of this theology into practice, supporting women who have been let down by those who are meant to love them, training church leaders to recognise and respond well to domestic abuse when they come across it. We want to see a network of churches that never tolerate abuse, but instead provide a safe refuge for survivors, nurture them back to health, and demonstrate God's deep love for them. But there are more challenges ahead. With lockdowns increasing across the country as we speak, we anticipate the number of survivors needing help and support will only increase. Churches will be under increasing pressure to respond. We want to equip and enable them to do that, to hold their arms as they shepherd their congregations, to help women discover the truth that God is for them, that he loves them deeply and has plans to give them hope and a future. So we'd love you to stand with us as we do that. I said before, we love to work with friends, and we can't do this alone. Anything that you give to support the work of Restored will make a huge difference to us and to women who desperately need to have their story changed. A regular donation of just £5 or even £10 a month would help us equip more leaders to provide an effective response to survivors of abuse. And then we'll send you a free copy of The Bible Doesn't Tell Me So as soon as it's available, however much you choose to give. And if you'd like to sign up, just follow the link in the comments below that I think Esther is going to put there for us. So Helen, thank you. I'm just going to wait and see if I've got to do some shenanigans on my technical side now to see if I can find the questions that have come through. Here we are, here we go. I've got a couple coming through. It started for 10. Why do you think it's so hard for some church leaders to speak out about this issue and actually address it? Oh, hard hitting.
Oh, I think there's a whole range of issues. I think one of the chief blocks actually is just ignorance, that they don't realise that it could be happening within their church. Perhaps they're not informed about what it looks like as well. It's probably the minority, well, it would be only the minority of people who experience domestic abuse who are going to show up with bruises and so on. So it's a question of being more attuned to spotting these things. But why it is not preached, I do not know. I'm afraid I cannot explain it, and I won't defend it either. It should be preached. It should be spoken out about, because things that are spoken out about gain the people think about them, people consider them, and they engage with them. So I'm sorry, I'm not going to defend it, and I'm not sure I can explain it.
And you know, on that note, I'm very excited that the vicar at my church has just asked me to help him with a service specifically looking at domestic abuse.
Brilliant.
So we're collaborating on, we're working through this, the book of Genesis at the moment. And of course you get to the story in Genesis 34 of the rape of Adina or Dinah. I'm never entirely sure how to say her name.
Dinah, I think, yeah. I read it this morning, actually.
How pleasant. But it's a horrible story, and it often gets skipped over if you're doing a series and you're going through. And he, you know, Tom just very rightly said, I don't want to skip it, Bekah. I want us to talk about it, and I want us to talk about violence against women, and I want us to talk about what does this story mean for survivors, and what does this story mean for abusers, and what does this story mean for us. So we're doing that, and you know, so I'm quite excited about doing that. We're recording it in a couple of weeks, so I will put that resource on Restored. So if anybody else would like to nick a sermon on it, we can go there, because when you talk about it, you make it stops being taboo, doesn't it? It means it's something, well, if we speak about it, it's something we're allowed to talk about, and then I'm allowed to talk to my church leader about if I've got a problem.
Yeah.
Whereas if nobody talks about it, how do we break that barrier and get through and raise it ourselves?
Yeah.
So here's another question. I'm trying to read that. So do you think there's a place in church for a special sign to say you need help? Oh, I wonder if they mean like it, like, and so in Tesco's or Boots, I think they had a way that you could put a mark on the receipt and then you could hand it in and somebody would know. I think that might, what do you think about that?
I think that could be great. It'd be great. Obviously, it would have to be well understood within the church. It would have to be part of the kind of church culture that. But I think that yeah, sometimes church is the only place that, as someone who's being, really, really controlled, sometimes church is the only place that they actually are allowed to go to. So it can be the only opportunity for someone to spot what's going on. So, yeah.
That's a good idea. I'm going to think about that one a little bit further as we carry on. And I'm not sure. I don't think we've got any more questions. So that is very, I think we've got there and we've done brilliantly. But is there anything else you'd just like to add or throw in that we haven't covered, Helen?
There's a psalm that I refer to in my book. I'll just tell a brief story. It's about, I can't remember the number of the psalm offhand, but essentially I was going to a conference. And it was about sexual abuse and rape and a whole load of other cheerful things and such matters. And it was on a Friday, and I was preaching on this particular psalm on the Sunday, and I hadn't written my sermon. So I went to this conference and I had printed the psalm out. So that if I had any kind of downtime during the day, I might just kind of have a look at it and just continue to play with it in my mind. And so I sat in this conference all day, listening to these appalling stories, with this psalm sitting face up on the desk looking at me. And the psalm says words to the effect of, it talks about evildoers, as the psalm does, about those who harm others. And then it says, they think God does not see. And it says, I think it calls them fools, and it says, did he who made the eye does he not see?
Wow.
And as I was, and this text was sort of resonating with everything I was seeing and hearing, and I thought, I know what I need to preach on now. And so I went home and I preached that. I preached about abuse and all sorts of types of abuse. And I just, that refrain really from the psalm, did the one who made the eye, does he not see? He absolutely sees, and you are a fool if you think he is not watching. So yes, if you are an abuser, God sees, and he most certainly sees. But if you are somebody who's experiencing it, God sees you. God sees, and he knows, and he understands. And nothing that happens to you in the darkest place or the darkest moment, nothing is unseen.
That's really extraordinarily comforting, isn't it, to know that? Well, Helen, I just want to say thank you really for writing your book, for doing all the study that you've done to enable you to do that, to following that call on God. And, what a huge sacrifice actually, and what a risk to step out and step away from, being a doctor and to go where you are. And I just think that what you're doing and the studies that you're doing, the books that you're writing, the way that you're able to contribute to these kind of conversations is so immensely valuable. So I just want to say thank you for that. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for letting us have some of your books so that we can give them away. That's awesome. And yes, I just want to say to everybody, please, if you do get your hands on a copy of Helen's book, it's brilliant. It would help you, wherever your position is, whether you are somebody who's experiencing abuse, whether you're a church leader, whether you're a small group leader or a youth leader, somebody just wants to understand those difficult passages a little bit more and put them into context and understand how to answer some of those difficult questions. It's all totally, it would help with any of those situations. So Helen, I'm going to say thank you, and then I'm going to let you go.
Thank you.
And we'll see you again soon. All right, take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.